Now, I think it is time to confront the reality of fascism in America. Now, I know a lot of people are having difficulty with this. I see you in the comments. So, in this video, we're going to address that, what is going on, and how people are facing up to it or denying it. There's a lot of denial going on at the moment. So we're going to listen to some experts and I'm going to react to them. The first one up is Timothy Snyder, who is an expert historian on fascism, authoritarianism in different countries, and he is being interviewed. So let's get straight into it and see what he says about it.
Do you come across people, as I do, who are in abject denial that there is a kind of rise of fascism in the US? Because for as many people as I can have similar conversations with, there are just as many people who they won't hear of the comparisons with Nazi Germany. Maybe 1932 or 1933 you need to be drawing the comparison with. Do you find that there are just people who just don't want to hear about the Hitler comparisons and everything else?
Well, I mean, I think the way to think about that is there were a lot of people in 1930s Germany that thought what was happening was just fine.
Right.
Maybe you're talking to them. I mean, you can't use Nazi Germany as a negative example for the people who would have liked Nazi Germany, right? And let's face it, there are a fair number of such people in the United States, including in the White House. So, I mean, I'm just trying to take a step back and point to a more elemental problem. The people who would have been happy in Germany in 1935 or 1939 are not going to be displeased, and of course they're going to resist the comparison because they know you mean that as a negative thing. So I think we should be clear that would probably be part of the problem.
Okay, so that's a good first point there. There are genuinely people who want fascism to happen. As he said, they would have been happy with what was happening in early 1930s Germany. I mean, it has been said that whenever we talk about 1930s Germany, we think about 1940s Germany and what it led to, and that's the danger of this kind of ideology, of course. It starts off in incremental steps and then escalates, and we're seeing the beginnings of that, the breaking down of the rule of law, sending people off to El Salvadorian prison with no due process, even wanting to send US citizens out, and this is how it started in Germany in the early 1930s. They mentioned 1933 or even before that when it started off. And so, as Timothy said there are people who actually want this, and I have seen you in the comments. People can't see anything wrong with this, actually want this, know what's going on, and actually celebrating it and wanting it. And it's kind of extreme. And there are other people that are in denial who wouldn't like to see, this happening, but are in denial. And other people who just really don't know what's going on, just going on about their daily lives, not even really knowing. They might see, the news every now and then. They may watch Fox News. If you watch Fox News, you'd think there was nothing going on and everything was great. So what is the second point that he talks about here?
Another part of the problem is that Americans resist any kind of historical comparison because we are, I mean, I assume you're talking about Americans, but we think that we are on our own trajectory and we're outside of history and, city on a hill and all of that. And we don't really like to know about other people and what happened to them. But in general, I mean, to answer your literal question, I don't really run. Let me try to say something else interesting. When you're outside of the U.S., I don't know anybody who has that problem.
Yeah, it's the same with me. But that's
and I'm outside the US, by the way, so yeah, I don't have that problem. I can see what's going on, and sometimes people outside the bubble can see better from outside what's going on. When you're in that media bubble, in particular, as I said, Fox News bubble, you might not see anything, but they're talking about people, say in Europe and other places, who see the changes, what's going on, and are quite horrified.
European, that's historical trauma, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's also just clarity, right? Like if you're in Canada and people look at the US, they may not all use the word fascism, but the idea that that nothing significant is going on in the US is pretty absurd. Or if you're in Ukraine, like, the difference between now and a few weeks ago is pretty stark. There's not much room for denying it. Like if you're in Germany and the American vice president has turned up and said, oh, by the way, my friend's tech companies should run your national conversation so that the fascists can come to power. Like, it's not in those situations, it's pretty clarifying, right?
Yeah, it's clarifying, all right. And so he's talking about in Germany there, JD Vance went there. Elon Musk actively supported the AfD party there, which is very far right. Elon says that it's a moderate party or centrist, but his idea of centrist is pretty far right. And so people in Europe can see what's going on pretty easily. They've been through it, as he said, their historical trauma, but it is easier to see perhaps from outside.
I would just kind of say the real question is like, what mechanisms are there in the United States which prevent us from seeing what's actually going on? I think that's the real problem.
Now we're going to listen to Anne Applebaum here, another expert on authoritarianism. She's written a book called Autocracy Inc., which is a very good book talking about different autocracies in the world and how they work together, the differences and similarities, and how they rose to power. She really is an expert on this, and so is Timothy Snyder, who wrote On Freedom and On Tyranny. Both those books, excellent books that I can recommend about this if you're interested.
How do you cope with this in your, without, and I'm not going to ask you to use names or anything like that, but in your private life, how do you cope with people whom you once held dear going off in these bad paths?
So this was a topic of my previous book, Twilight of Democracy. I had this experience actually in multiple countries because I don't know if you would call me conservative or Republican, but I was certainly an anti-communist, and that put me in that camp. For many years. And my friends in Poland, where I lived part of the time, and in London, where I worked for many years, and in the United States, were also came from that world. And I watched that world divide in many places. And it's funny, I thought that in 2016, I'd been through that, in 2015 in Poland, 2016 in the US, that I'd been through that the divisions had resolved themselves. The people who were really fanatical and wound up being pro-Trump or fanatically pro-Brexit in some cases, that they had sort of faded out of my life. And then I discovered in this election cycle in 2024 that there were new incidences of it, and there were new friends who were put off by whether it was transgender issues or whether it was economic issues, who found themselves wanting to support Trump. And I frankly don't cope very well with it. I know some people are better at separating their political views and their private lives than I am. Some people, I know a lot of people have relatives who are on the other side of a divide and they have to live with them because you don't desert your elderly father for something like that. But I have found it difficult because this story comes so close to, I want to say values that I hold, but also values that I thought all of us shared. So, if I'm the people who I know and who I consider to be friends, I think of them as people who believe in the rule of law, who support the Constitution, who think, a democratic political system is better, who are bothered by lying in politics, and that they're part of a kind of, it's not that we all share, we don't have to have the same views about everything, but there are these kind of basic values that we share. And I've discovered that that's not true. And I find it now difficult to deal with people who now live in this other reality.
So that's really interesting, I think. She's talking about people not even in denial who might see things going on in the US, see people being deported even without due process, and they know that, and they cheering it on, saying, yes, I want that person to leave, without realizing that it also down the line could mean them, just because it's not them, it's not their friends, it's not their family. But it could be one day if they start to break that rule of law down as they are. And we've seen Stephen Miller, one of my previous videos, he wants to suspend habeas corpus. He wants to send people away with no due process of the law, not being in front of a judge, just sending them away. And there are people celebrating that. And as she's saying there might be people that we know that actually saying that, and she finds that very difficult to deal with. So we've got these people actually wanting this to happen in these steps, but she knows where this can go because she's studied these different regimes, even regimes around the world that are happening now. She mentioned Poland, which was pulled back from the brink of an authoritarian regime, really, because because they still had a relatively free press and they were able to mobilize and pull back from authoritarianism. And this is just in the last few years, and she's seen that happen, so she can see where it goes. So she's concerned about other people and finds it difficult, people that actually want this.
And the thing I'm most afraid of now is that once you made the decision to vote for Trump in 2024, especially in 2016, it was different because we didn't really know what kind of a president he was going to be. It could have been a protest. You didn't like Hillary Clinton, whatever. There were reasons why people did it. When you chose in 2024, you chose someone who had broken the law in multiple ways, and you knew it. You chose someone who sought to overthrow the results of the election of 2020, and you knew it. So you were choosing someone who you knew to be lawless, who you knew had disdain for American institutions. And I think that the people who made that decision are going to have a lot of trouble backtracking, moving back on it. And, I've seen there are lots of commentary now about, Trump did this or that. Are the people who voted for him going to be sorry now? And I think it's going to be a long time before they're sorry, because they made this intellectual commitment to something that was against many of the things that they stood for. They had to justify it to themselves in many different ways. We just talked about one of them because Biden is corrupt, whatever. And now it's going to be very hard to turn around and say that was wrong. It's going to be, they will stick to this. They will go stand by it. They will find new reasons to support Trump precisely because it was such a bad choice. And precisely because they had to overcome their own internal doubts, and precisely because they know he broke the law, and precisely because they know he has disdain for things that they say that they value. And so I worry that it's going to be very hard to make up with them at some point in the future.
And yes, I've seen this too in the comments, and my other channel in the comments too. People who do support Trump, who did support Trump, who really are having difficulty even accepting what's going on, that it could be neo-fascism or going down or that authoritarian route very quickly because they did support, and it's hard to go back. You notice that with debates online, arguments online, does anybody ever convince anybody of anything in social media or in a forum, or just people shouting at each other? And I've seen people in the comments of this very channel already, even though it's a new channel, really being in denial. And I've said, did you actually watch the video? Because they're like talking about, as you said, the Biden previous administration. And I'm thinking of 1930s Germany. Before that happened, we had the Weimar Republic, which was liberal. It's very similar in some ways to the United States. And then we had the Nazi regime coming on. If you look at that and compare it and you say, well, maybe some people didn't like the liberal regime that was going on, some of the bad things about it, but does that mean what came next was better? And maybe it took a long time for people to come around to that. Some people didn't. It was very popular, just as Trump is in the US, and maybe ignoring some of the things that are going on that have already happened. Last video was about the Trump Gestapo, the ICE officers, and they seem to be recruiting thug-type people with masks, plain clothes, as somebody pointed out in the comments, like the Proud Boy types. This stuff is going on, which has definitely parallels to other authoritarian regimes, and people don't seem to be accepting it. Some people are, but a lot of people still aren't. It's still early days, and that's part of the reason that I'm making these videos. I think it's important at this time.
I mean, actually, funny enough, I would think it's more the less informed voters for whom this matters less, for whom it was not such a big decision. They're the ones who might say, well, I don't like the fact that he's done these tariffs and screwed up the economy, and they might switch sides. But
yes.
but the better educated voters, I think they made a choice and they're going to stick with it. We'll see. But that would be my guess.
Okay, so this is David Cay Johnston. He is talking about Trump. He's written books about Trump, known Trump for a long time. He is talking about a similar thing, just from a different angle here, just quickly.
So these things do take time. But Donald's authoritarian impulses in other areas, using the military as he's promised to do against American citizens, deporting American citizens, deporting students who protest on campus. Those things probably will come back, hopefully will come back to wake people up to this loss of liberty and this notion that we're going to tell you what you can read, what products you can buy, what medical drugs and other medical interventions will be available to you. That over time shouldn't play particularly well. On the other hand, look, the American people have the right to overthrow their democracy and create a dictatorship. The Constitution has a method for doing it. You just, over time, change the government and change the rules. Hopefully, people just aren't that gullible and dumb, but we don't know.
Well, as he said, well, it kind of remains to be seen whether that actually happens. If it's popular, if people actually want this, if there's enough people who continue to want this, if it goes down the authoritarian route and people are cheering it on, and we have seen that in other countries in history, we can't expect that people actually do want democracy. They might see some of the flaws that have been and say, let's try something else, and it can go to a very bad place. They said in the same interview, and I'm going to leave links to all these interviews so you can see the whole thing if you want to. He said that it has to play itself out. Poland was pulled back from the brink, but does this have to play out? What do you think in the comments? Let me know what you think about this. Do you think it's the right way to try and talk to people? Do you think some people can be swayed by talking rationally about this and saying they're doing this, this, and this is really bad? What do you think? Do let me know in the comments. And right now I'm going to put a related video right there and also a subscribe link. Do subscribe. It's a new channel here. It's a second channel, a spin-off channel where I can talk freely about politics, about fascism, authoritarianism, what I see. So do subscribe, and thanks for watching this one, and I'll see you in the next one.